Welcome back to Mr. DuPage's classroom. This lesson is for my Algebra 2 class. It is 3-6, day 1, the fundamental theorem of algebra. The fundamental theorem of algebra states the degree equals the number of real and imaginary roots or solutions. So basically the degree will tell us how many answers we should have. We have talked about that in the past, but that is the fundamental theorem of algebra. Now we're going to have a priority list. A priority list will tell us what we should be looking for and in what order. So the first thing on the priority list is we are going to look for the GCF. The second thing, if we have 3 terms, we'll use normal factoring. It's where we split it into 2 sets of parentheses and get an answer that way. If we have 4 terms, we will use grouping or synthetic division. And lastly, if we need to use the quadratic formula. Now we have done all these things this year. In fact, that's basically what we've been doing for the most part for the last couple weeks. All right. So we need to find all real and imaginary roots of the polynomials. Basically what this is telling us is we are going to solve each polynomial. All right. So first, we want to look for a GCF. Well, there is no number in front of x to the third. There is no x behind 12, so there is no GCF. All right. The next thing is if we count the number of terms, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. Let's look up here at our priority list. It tells us that we want to look at grouping first. How I can tell whether or not I can group this is looking at our numbers. Here I have a 1 and a 3. Okay? Is there any way that I can divide 4 and 12 by the same number, basically my GCF, and get 1 and 3? There is. I would divide by 4 to get to 1 and 3. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to group it. So draw a line down the middle. My GCF for x to the third minus 3x squared should be x squared. So I'm going to write x squared. What's left from x to the third would just be x. From negative 3x squared would be negative 3. My GCF between 4 and 12 would be 4. So I'm going to add 4. That would leave me with x minus 3 again. All of that will be equal to 0. All right. Now I want to group or put into one set of parentheses my x squared and my 4. So x squared plus 4. I can write down the x minus 3 just one time. And we are on our way. Now x squared plus 4 does look like the difference of 2 squares, but that is the sum of 2 squares. We have never talked about anything to do with the sum of 2 squares, so I'm just going to set everything equal to 0. Go ahead and subtract 4 from both sides. That would leave me with x squared is equal to negative 4. Take the square root. So x equals plus or minus 2i. That is something that we learned when we were doing square roots in the first quarter. If you do not remember how to do square roots, make sure you go back and take a look or come in and ask me a question. Now x minus 3 equals 0. I'm going to add 3. So x would equal 3. How many answers do I have? Well, I have 1 positive 2i, I have 1 negative 2i, and I have a 3. So I should have 3 answers, and that is what my degree tells me. So I am done. All right. On to number 2. Number 2, I have 3 terms. 3 terms tells me I want to use normal factoring. The first thing in normal factoring is GCF. Well, there's no number in front of the x to the fourth. There's no x behind 24. So that means that there is no GCF. But I'm looking for something that I can multiply to 24 So 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 4 times 6. I missed one, I'm sorry. 3 times 8 and 4 times 6. That can get me to positive 11. Out of those groups, adding things up, 3 and 8 would get me to positive 11. So I'm going to set up 2 sets of parentheses. I'm going to have 3 and 8. Well, I want 3 and 8 to add to 11, so they would both need to be positive. Now, in our first blank, it comes from our x to the 4th. What is half of x to the 4th? Well, half of x to the 4th would be x squared and x squared. All that will be equal to 0. 3 is not a perfect square. 8 is not a perfect square, so I definitely cannot do the difference of 2 squares. So again, just like I did in problem 1, I will take x squared plus 3, set it equal to 0. X squared plus 8, set it equal to 0. Subtract 3, subtract 3. X squared is equal to negative 3. Take the square root. Anytime I have the square root of a negative number, I'm going to end up with an I. Now, 3, there is no way to break up 3 into a perfect square and a non-perfect square, so I'm going to have plus or minus I root 3. Again, that came from our lesson on square roots. Here I'll subtract 8. X squared would equal negative 8. If I take the square root, x will equal 8 can be broken into the square root of 4 and the square root of 2 and the square root of negative 1. We have done that again in our square root lesson. So here, the square root of 4 is plus or minus 2. The square root of negative 1 is I. And we just have the square root of 2. So again, I have a plus and a minus over here. I have a plus and a minus over here, so I have 4 answers. How many should I have? I should have 4, so we are good. On to the third problem. I have x cubed minus 2x squared minus 2x minus 3. Here, I have 4 terms, so I'm going to look at the numbers I have for my first group, which would be 1 and 2. Is there any way I can divide by a single number that would get negative 2 and negative 3 to 1 and 2? There is not, so I'm going to use synthetic. For my list for synthetic, 3, there's only one way to multiply to 3, and it's 1 times 3, so I'd have plus or minus 1 over 1, plus or minus 3 over 1. I'm going to use short track synthetic again, so I have to use my coefficients from the problem. 1, negative 2, negative 2, negative 3. All that is, now I'm going to use 1 first, okay? Drop my 1. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 minus 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. Negative 1 minus 2 is negative 3. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. Negative 3 minus negative 3 would be negative 6, so this one will not work. Okay? The next number I want to use is negative 1. Drop the 1. 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. Negative 1 minus 2 would be negative 3. Negative 3 times negative 1 is positive 3. Positive 3 minus 2 would get me 1. 1 times negative 1 would be negative 1. Minus 3 would be negative 4. So again, this will not work. On to number 3. Drop the 1. 1 times 3 would be 3. 3 minus 2 would be 1. 1 times 3 would be 3. 3 minus 2 would be 1. 1 times 3 would be 3. 3 minus 3 would be 0. So that did in fact work. Okay? That did in fact work. So now what I'm going to be left with is x minus 3, because we used the opposite of the term that worked for us. Then I would have x squared plus x plus 1 is equal to 0. Can I factor x squared plus x plus 1? Well, 1 is... I cannot, there's nothing that will multiply to 1 that will add to 1. So because of that, there's no way to factor that other than to use the quadratic formula. Now, you guys do not have number 5 on the front of your paper, but for some reason I do right now. So I'm going to take the rest of my work over here. Just keep working through the area that you do have. All right. So I'm going to split this up into x minus 3 equals 0. Add 3, x would equal 3. Now I have to use the quadratic formula on the x squared plus x plus 1. Again, we have used the quadratic formula before, but for a quick reminder, the quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. My a value in this case would be 1, my b value would be 1, and my c value would be 1. So x would equal negative 1 plus or minus 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times 1 all over 2 times 1. If I simplify everything there, I would have negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 squared would be 1. Negative 4 times 1 would be negative 4 all over 2, because 2 times 1 is 2. So x would equal negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 3 over 2. Now 3, we talked about this already. The square root of negative 3, I can't really break it up too much, but what I can do is make this negative 1 plus or minus I root 3, because the square root of a negative number is always I. In that case, I'm going to have 2 answers because of the plus or minus, so I have 2 answers there. I have 1 answer here, so I have 3 total answers. How many am I supposed to have? 3. So we are good. All right. On to number 4. Number 4, I do have a number in front of x to the 5th, and I do have an x behind negative 162. So in this case, I only have 2 terms, and it's always the first thing we should be looking for anyway. I am going to use the GCF. Well, 2 and 162 are both divisible by 2. I'm looking for the largest number of x's I can take from both of my terms. Well, the largest number of x's I can take from 162x is just 1. So that is all I can take out. That would leave me with x to the 4th minus 81. All that's equal to 0. 2x I can't do much with yet, but x to the 4th is a perfect square. 9 is a perfect square. I do have a subtraction sign, so I can make this x squared and 9, x squared and 9, doing the difference of 2 squares here. I'm going to have an addition sign and a subtraction sign. Well, x squared minus 9 is also the difference of 2 squares, so I can have 2x times x squared plus 9 times x plus 3, x minus 3, all equal to 0. Because the square root of 9 is 3 and the square root of x squared is x, that is why I was able to make that x plus 3 and x minus 3. Now from here, I'm going to set everything equal to 0. Okay. If I divide by 2 here, I end up with x equals 0. I can subtract 3, so x equals negative 3. I can add 3, so x would equal positive 3. Now I have x squared plus 9. X squared is a perfect square, 9 is a perfect square, but I have an addition sign in between, so I cannot use the difference of 2 squares. I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides. That would leave me with x squared equals negative 9. Take the square root, so x will equal. I have a negative number, so I'm going to end up with an I. But what is the square root of 9? Well, it is plus or minus 3. So I have one answer of x equals 0. 2 answers from plus or minus 3i, 1 answer from negative 3, and 1 answer from positive 3. So 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 1 would get me 5. My degree is 5, so I had 5 answers. That's what I was looking for, and so we are good. All right. On to problem number 5. Again, I have 4 terms. The first thing I would always look for is a GCF. There is no number in front of x to the third. There's no x behind 9, so I do not have a GCF. But looking at this, I can make these two numbers are 1 and 1. Is there any number I can divide 9x and 9 by in order to get to 1 and 1? There is. It would be 9. So I can group these. My GCF between, well, let's draw the line down the middle. My GCF between x to the third and x squared would be x squared, which would leave me with x plus 1. Sorry, I want to make those in two different colors. I apologize. So x plus 1. My GCF between 9x and 9 would be positive 9, which would also leave me with x plus 1. Now I can combine my x squared and my 9. Since these are the same, my x plus 1 is the same. I only have to write it down once. All of this will be equal to 0. Now we've talked about this a couple different times. This x squared plus 9 is not the difference of two squares, so there's no way for me to factor it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set that equal to 0. I'm also going to set x plus 1 equal to 0, which is easier to solve. If I subtract 9, x squared would equal negative 9. In order to get rid of the squared on x squared, I'd have to square root everything. So x would equal plus or minus, the square root of 9 is 3. Anytime it's negative under the square root, I end up with I. So plus or minus 3i. I have two answers from the plus or minus 3i, one answer from negative 1, so I should have three answers. According to our degree, that is correct, so we are good. On to number 6. Number 6. We have four terms again. This time, however, I do not have a GCF, and there is no way to take, I will need to get 1 and 3 would be inside my parentheses. There's no way to get negative 14 and negative 20 by dividing by the same number to 1 and 3. So I'm going to have to use synthetic. Okay, all right? So the terms for negative 20 are 1 times 20, 2 times 10, 4 times 5. So my list is going to be x equals plus or minus. My smallest number is 1 over 1 because there'd be a 1 out in front of the x cubed. Then plus or minus 2 over 1. Plus or minus 4 over 1. Plus or minus 5 over 1. Plus or minus 10 over 1. And plus or minus 20 over 1. Now, this is probably going to take a little bit of time. Just be prepared for that. What we are going to do now is use the synthetic division. Okay? So my coefficients are 1, 3, negative 14, and negative 20. This is the reason why I told you probably want to learn short track synthetic. If I put 1 in my box, drop my 1. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 plus 3 would be 4. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 minus 14 would be negative 10. Negative 10 times 1 is negative 10. Negative 10 minus 20 would be negative 30. So this list did not work. So I'm going to go on to my next smallest, which is negative 1. If I drop 1, 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. Negative 1 plus 3 would be would be positive 2. Positive 2. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Negative 2 minus 14 would be negative 16. Negative 16 times negative 1 would be positive 16. Positive 16 minus 20 would be negative 4. So that also did not work. Let's go to 2. Drop the 1. 1 times 2 is 2. 2 plus 3 is 5. 5 times 2 is 10. 10 minus 14 is negative 4. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 minus 20 would be negative 28. Now, I could continue and continue and continue and continue. But what I'm going to do is take you to the point where it's actually going to work, which is -5. If I drop the 1, 1 times -5 is -5. -5 plus 3 is -2. -2 times -5 is +10. +10 minus 4 would be -4. -4 times -5 would be +20. +20 minus 20 would be 0. So this would work in that case. All right. But if you were doing this, what you need to realize is you would have to continue all the way through that until you found one that got to 0 for you. All right. First step is to make an x. I'm going to use the opposite of this, so +5. Then I need to make my polynomial from these numbers. I started with x to the third, so this will be x squared minus 2x minus 4. All that would equal 0. Now, is there anything I can multiply to get 4 that would add to -2? Well, I have 1 times 4, that would never get me to -2, and 2 times 2 would never get me to -2, so there's no way for me to do anything there. What we're going to have to do in that case is the quadratic formula again. So I'm going to go ahead and handle this x plus 5 before I start the quadratic to get one of our answers. Now we're going to take this over here. We're going to need some space. So x equals, the opposite of b would be 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so -2 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is -4. All that would be over 2 times a, which is 1. Now I just need to simplify. So 2 plus or minus the square root. -2 squared would be 4. -4 times 1 times -4 would be +16. All of that would be over 2. X would equal 2 plus or minus the square root of 20 over 2. Now 20 I can break up. I can break that up into the square root of 4 and the square root of 5. So I can take 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 and the square root of 5 all over 2. I do have a square root for 4, so 2 root 5 over 2. Now, I have a term that has a 2. I have another term that has a 2. So I do have a GCF here. X would equal to 1 plus or minus 1 root 5, or you could just write root 5 there, all over 2. Since this is multiplication right here, since that is multiplication, I can get rid of the 2's. So my final answer would be x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 5, which is actually 2 answers, plus the 1 answer I had over here. Between all of my answers, I'm supposed to have 3, according to my degree, which I do. Guys, the most important thing here is all of this is review. Every single thing on this paper is review. You know how to take the GCF. You should know how to, with 3 terms, have normal factoring. You should know how to group if you need to with 4 terms. You should know how to get synthetic division, do synthetic division if you have 4 terms. You also should know how to use the quadratic formula. All these things are things that we have talked about this year, and most of them are things that we've been consistently using. If we are still struggling with this stuff, guys, you really need to get in and get some help on specific things. If you need help with GCF, get in here and get help with GCF. If you need help with factoring, get in here and get some help with factoring. Anything that you are struggling with, you need to come see me and get help. You cannot just sit there and not try to work through it, because when you do that, all you're going to do is continue to be confused, and that is not going to be good for you. So if you have any questions, please come in and see me. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching this video, and have a great day.